Thank you. Now I recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Inspector General Lennox, did you desire to interview Secretary Clinton as part of your investigation?
Yes, we did.
And were you able to do so?
No, we were not.
And how was it communicated to you that you were not going to be able to do so?
Through her counsel, David Kendall had sent a letter to one of the team leaders on the report.
Is that letter available for Congress to inspect?
You know, I'll go back and check, but I'll have to get back to you on that. I mean, it certainly exists. Whether if it's legal to provide it to you, sure.
Well, let's do this then. Let's fast forward and let's assume that you were able to interview her. Why did you seek to interview her, and what questions specifically would you have asked?
Well, the focus of our report was not about classified information. The focus of our report was how the department, over the past 20 years, addressed records preservation and cybersecurity. You know, we were looking at whether or not there was a rule the department issued in 2005 requiring that employees use departmental systems. She used a non-departmental system, her server, to conduct official government business, and we wanted to ask her questions about that, whether she had approval, who approved it, and so forth. We also, so we wanted to get her perspective on those issues, among others.
So let me see if I have this right. The Inspector General for the State Department wanted to interview a former Secretary of State.
That's correct.
And that request was declined.
Yes.
Well, at first blush, it sounds like your question was a reasonable one. You want to make sure that the information is safeguarded and protected and archived consistent with law. So I wonder why you weren't able to interview her. You given a reason?
Just the reason that I articulated before. Other than that, I would be speculating.
What other questions, and if you need to ask any of the wonderful folks with you, what other questions would you have sought to ask the former Secretary of State?
Well, we also looked at records preservation, and the rules required certain that she print and file her emails, and that she, you know, make sure that they're part of the agency record-keeping system. We would have asked her about that. We would have asked her about some of the attempts to hack her system, at least as expressed by her, some of her staff, which we've identified in our report. We probably would have asked her about that. So those are the kinds of things, her state of mind and so forth.
I don't think you were in the room for Director Comey's testimony, and I don't know whether or not you had access to it in the back. Are you familiar with his testimony that convenience was one of the intentions the former secretary had in having this unusual email arrangement with herself?
No, I don't recall that, but I did watch parts of the testimony.
All right. He did cite convenience as one of the factors. Do you know when her emails were returned to the State Department?
They were returned 21 months after she left the department.
What was going on the second month after she left that made it inconvenient to return them then?
I wouldn't be able to comment on that.
How about the fourth month?
Again, I just don't know.
How about the one-year anniversary?
Same answer.
Do you know what possibly could have inspired her to begin searching for those records?
Well, she did receive a request from the department to return records in accordance with their obligations under the Federal Records Act and NARA regulations.
But that obligation didn't manifest itself 21 months later. That obligation was present the day she left office.
And one of our findings was, along with Secretary Powell, that both of them failed to surrender their records, their personal records containing government business, when they left the department, thus depriving the department of having those records as part of the agency record-keeping system.
And I assume you probably would have asked the former secretary, had you had an opportunity to do so, why it took 21 months to return public record. And just so there's no, I mean, nobody likes Congress. I get that. We're not sympathetic. But there are FOIA requests that would have been received by the State Department during that time period, right?
Possibly.
How would those FOIA requests have been responded to and complied with if they didn't even have the records?
Well, as we identified in our previous report on FOIA, it would have been difficult if the records are not part of the agency record-keeping system to respond to FOIA.
I'm out of time, but I know the chairman will give me one more question since he's given a lot more than one more question to other folks. I want you to assume an absurd hypothetical that Secretary of State has exclusive use of personal email and that she is corresponding with someone who also uses personal email. You with me?
I'm with you.
How in the world is the State Department ever going to capture that email?
It would be, and this is something we addressed in our FOIA report, it would be difficult because...
That'd be a challenge, wouldn't it?
It would, because only records under the agency's control are subject to FOIA. So in other words, the department wouldn't be able to reach in necessarily to a private account. So
well, you wouldn't even know about it, would you? If it's personal to personal, how would you know about it?
You wouldn't know about it.
All right, well, I'm barely out of time. Thank the chairman.
We'll now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lennox, let me come to you, and feel free to have Ms. Costello jump in if she can illuminate the answer better. On March of 2015, Secretary Clinton publicly said, and I quote, "I opted for convenience to use my personal email account, which was allowed by the State Department." Close quote. She went further to say, "The laws and regulations in effect when I was Secretary of State allowed me to use my email for work. That is undisputed." Close quote. Are those accurate statements?
Well, I hesitate to comment on public statements, but I will say that our report shows that...
well, we're in a public forum now, and obviously a lot's been said about it. Are those accurate or not?
But I can tell you our report said that she didn't have approval from senior officials of the department, and we don't believe it was permitted, both under the rules and none of the officials, the senior officials who were there at the time, gave her approval or were even aware that she had a server, according to them.
So let me see if I can digest that long answer into a very short, concise statement. It is not an accurate statement.
Again, she didn't have approval. So,
okay, so Ms. Costello, would she have required approval in order to be able to use a personal email according to regulation? Would she have required that kind of approval?
Ms. Costello, I need you to bring your chair up and sit next to Mr. Lennox, if you would, because we need to be able to capture that for our recording purposes. She was sworn.
I was.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So in order to exclusively use personal email for official business, Secretary Clinton would have required approval. The reason we know this is because the officials we interviewed at the department, both in the Office of Diplomatic Security and the Office of Information Resource Management, told us that. And in telling us that, they were relying on a department policy that was put in place in 2005, which says that day-to-day operations must be conducted, I'm paraphrasing, but must be conducted on authorized information systems. And so the implication there is any exclusive use would be a day-to-day operation and shouldn't occur without approval.
So that created a red flag for your investigative team?
As we reviewed the policies that were in place by the department, yes, it was something that we considered very carefully in evaluating the evidence that we obtained.
So her statement that this is undisputed would not be accurate. So I won't make you make a reference to the rest of it, but obviously it's disputed if we're disputing it here today.
I would say that in relying on the interviews that we conducted with the officials at the department, who would be the people responsible for implementing these policies, the answer is yes, it's disputed.
So they would dispute it?
They did.
Okay, and they did. All right, so for the record. So let me go on a little bit further, because who, so you mentioned who had the obligation. I guess, how difficult would it be to comply with the law, the Federal Records Act, if you are using your personal email account? What would you have to do?
Well, I want to draw a distinction here, because what we were just talking about were the cybersecurity provisions at the department, and now we've switched a little bit.
But to the Federal Records, wouldn't she have had to have printed out those emails and kept those to be in full compliance with the regulation?
Yes. During her tenure, folks in the Office of the Secretary, in order to comply with email records preservation and management policies at the department, needed to print and file those emails. Now, you can.
So out of the 30,000 emails that we've had testimony earlier today, how many printed copies of emails, of her emails, did you find?
I don't know, but I can say that we did find, as we reviewed other folks' emails and hard copy files, we did find some examples of
So in more than 1,000 printed?
I'm sorry, I can't hazard a guess on that. I really don't know.
All right, so can we get copies of all those printed emails through FOIA or through subpoena?
Well, those emails.
Because that's the whole reason for the Federal Records Act, is so it would be, so you're suggesting that there is a universe of printed out emails that we can find?
To the extent that other folks who Secretary Clinton emailed did go ahead and print and file.
Oh, so you're saying she didn't print any of them out?
Right, but they do.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a big difference. So she made no printed copies in order to comply with the law. That was somebody else perhaps printing it out, and she happens to be communicating with
Correct, and I'm sorry if I wasn't
Okay.
clear before.
No, that's
What
good. I'm out of
saying
time.
Is that they exist in the department. A few here and there do.
All right. I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I think the point that certainly Mr. Gowdy was making is, if those emails on a private server were mailed to somebody else who's not involved in the government, then there is no printed out copy as required.